Wow, that was impressive. I gotta take some notes on that for my house and my children. Well, welcome to everyone that's with us tonight. Welcome to everyone that is joining us from afar. And welcome to everyone who's watching the recording at some point. Anytime you have a function on a Friday evening, even at a boarding school, you're running into some other conflicts. But if you put college admissions in the title, usually you can draw a few folks and a few parents. My name is Joe Rulowich, and on behalf of the Petty College office, Lisa, Sarah, Grant, and Ann, I'd like to welcome all of you that are here with us today. Thank you so much for coming. We're testing our new No Class Saturday, Gold Week this week, which is exciting. But we have an amazing guest with us tonight. I just want to give you a little bit of background about Dean Powell. Dean Powell has always been a relentless advocate for access and affordability. His tireless efforts to knock down the often invisible barriers across socioeconomic and geographic lines have helped to profoundly shape all of the college communities to which he has belonged. During his time at Princeton, Dean Powell partnered with colleagues in financial aid to develop strategies for low-income student outreach and enrollment. He also served on the Education Access Committee dedicated to enhancing access and opportunity for low-income and first-generation students at Princeton. In his current role now at Brown, and he arrived at Brown in 2016, Dean Powell is well and widely known for his capacity and commitment to collaborate with campus partners throughout the community. His many achievements include an application fee waiver for low-income students, creating new pathways to access, the first ever fly-in program for high-achieving students from low-income rural backgrounds in small towns. What's most impressive about Logan is that so much of the work he does seems personal to his own experience and journey to and through college. Looking forward to sharing some of that as he shares his story with us. Dean Powell's dynamic and thoughtful tenure in higher education, as well as his day-to-day transformational work in admissions, has been influenced by his personal journey. I even found an interview from the Brown Alumni magazine, Logan. In the interview you shared, it was in college where our ideas and assumptions are often contested and perspectives broadened that I first encountered people from worlds vastly different from my own. And as we think about our college conversations, we think about the why behind college, and that really captures that. And Logan went on to say, what bound us was a common intellectual purpose, a desire to learn from books and from one another. The classroom was any location where a conversation was taking place. And I can't think of a better way to connect to Petty than those statements, which makes Dean Powell such a great fit. Before I turn the mic over to Logan, I think he stumbled into admissions back in the day, as most folks do, perhaps as a volunteer in the admissions office. Sounds like he was on a couple student panels as a student at Bowdoin. But we're incredibly fortunate to welcome you to Petty, to share your perspective, your knowledge, your insight from all years of experience. And thank you for coming, and without further ado, Dean Powell.
Thank you, Joe. That was incredibly generous as an introduction. Wonderful to see you all. It's great to be back in central New Jersey. I am Logan Powell. It's funny, I am newly, as of about a year ago, the Associate Provost for Enrollment. When I called my mom and gave her this news, this is a promotion that I didn't know was coming, I said, Mom, I've got this great news. I'm now the Associate Provost for Enrollment. She goes, that's wonderful. What does that mean? So times like that, they keep you humble. And I've always approached my work with humility and gratitude. And so I am grateful to Joe and his team for having me here today. It's great to be back in central New Jersey. I spent 9 years in central New Jersey as the Director of Admission at Princeton before I left and became Dean of Admission at Brown. So I have very fond memories of being back in this area, and so it's great to be back for a short period of time. How many of you, by the way, have been to Brown? Have any of you visited Brown? Yeah? Oh, wow. Okay, some very enthusiastic hands. Okay, wonderful. All right, good, good. Well, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Brown. And then, of course, any specific questions you have, I will answer. But I want to take sort of a macro view to begin, and then we will, like an admissions funnel, we will go from macro to micro, and then when we have the open dialogue, and I really do want it to be a dialogue, I'll answer any question you have about Brown or about the highly selective admission process. I think it is maybe helpful to tell you a little bit about where I come from, not because my story is important, but the perspective, I think, may be helpful to you, because it's how I think about the college journey for any student who's thinking about it. So I grew up a poor kid in Florida. I grew up in a trailer park in Jacksonville, just outside of Jacksonville, actually. A lot of government assistance. We grew up on food, what we back then called food stamps. Grew up on food stamps, and I didn't really know much about college search. I didn't have the opportunity to think about, what my trajectory was going to be. By great luck and a little coincidence, probably, I ended up at a high school where there was great college guidance, and I got incredibly lucky at that point. And that was where things began to shift for me, where I began to be introduced to this world of rigorous education, both secondary and then obviously tertiary. So I went to Bowdoin as an undergrad. I was a runner. I ran varsity track all 4 years. I did student government. I also had a whole bunch of campus jobs, not because I thought campus jobs were like the cool thing to do, but because I had to pay for books. My mom spent her whole life as a secretary, and so I was really deeply focused on where I could go that would be both affordable but also challenging in every way, intellectually, but also athletically. My best friends in life now are the friends that I met in college, and so I think about the college experience as not just, as Joe mentioned, I think appropriately, it's not just about the intellectual engagement in the classroom, but about the community. And I say that because you'll see some sense of this, you'll get some sense of this as I go on, about how the college process should be a search for community and not just a search for a sticker for the back of a car. And it's high stakes. This process has changed quite a bit in the time that I've done this. This is now my, aging myself here a little bit, but 28th year in admissions, believe it or not. So Joe hit the nail on the head. I went to Bowdoin. I was a biology major in college, but I knew I wasn't smart enough to go to medical school. So I, as a poor kid from Florida who was a science major, student government, track, the admissions office started asking me to do all these panels. And now I realize why. So I did them, and I love them because I love talking to people about the college application process. So I worked at Bowdoin for a couple of years after I graduated. I then went on to Harvard. I worked in the Harvard admissions office for 5 years. I went to Harvard for a master's degree in higher education. I then also went to MIT, where I got an MBA because I didn't suffer enough through running. I wanted to suffer through an MIT program, so I did my MBA at MIT. Worked for 9 years as the director of admissions at Princeton, and I'm now starting my 9th year as dean of admissions at Brown. But I never forget where I came from. But I also remember that college is about meeting students from all walks of life, from around the world, from across the country, bringing them together so that they can learn from each other and learn from their faculty and have this transformative experience. And so you'll see some statistics tonight because I want to give you a sense of what the college application process really means and what it really looks like. But I hope we can have a conversation about the process in general and what life on college campuses is like right now. I also have to say, by the way, as I was getting ready for this, I was thinking a little bit about the Petty motto because I think it certainly resonates with me right now, which is we finish our labors to begin them anew. And I thought, well, that's exactly where we are. We are just now at the beginning of another admission process, another academic year, another cycle where I get to meet fabulous students and parents from all around the world, and we get to begin our labors anew. But it's a labor of love, and so I'm really excited to be here and very, very happy to spend some time with you. So we'll dive right in. So this is a headline from the Wall Street Journal that I thought was appropriate for the year that we just concluded. If you can't see it, it says, "The most confusing, chaotic college admission season in years." And that's what it felt like. This was, in all of the years that I have done this, as I said, I've done this for almost 30 years, the year that we just concluded was hands down, without question, not even close, the most difficult year we've ever had in admissions. And that includes the COVID years, it includes the recession years. It was grueling for reasons that were beyond our control, in some cases unpredictable, in some cases predictable, but with impacts that we could not have always anticipated. So what do I mean? Why was this last year so challenging? And some of you may be asking, why do we care what happened last year? Because the same issues that affected us last year are carrying over into this year, and they may carry forward into future years as well. And so what were those challenges? What were those headwinds that we faced? Well, one was we'll put this politely, catastrophic meltdown of the federal financial aid application process, what we also call the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It was a disaster. It was a true disaster. Whether you need college financial aid or not, I think you can empathize with the families who require Pell Grants to go to college. I was a Pell Grant recipient when I went to college. Well, imagine if that whole process completely melted down in your child's senior year, not knowing whether or not they would receive federal grant aid to go to college. The result was the largest decline in the college-going population since COVID. So this had catastrophic effects for college going. It affected us at Brown. It affected well-resourced institutions as well. So we had that challenge to face. You all know very well the impact that the war in the Middle East had. Obviously the horror that occurred on October 7th, the aftermath of that, the suffering in Gaza. I'm not making any political statements here. There is a great deal of suffering that is going on there right now. And, we, of course, are coming up on the anniversary of October 7th. These tensions are still ongoing on our campus in some very, very serious ways. The conversations are as tense as any I've ever seen. And I was just at that point when I was going to college that I remember the conversations around apartheid in South Africa. This is, in my memory, exponentially more controversial and heartrending than that. So we are still dealing with this. Presidents lost jobs. Presidents of universities resigned. It is really difficult. We have students who are, putting up encampments. We have faculty who have very strong feelings about this. We have students who have strong feelings about it. And these tensions will carry forward into the fall and to the foreseeable future. We reinstated standardized testing. This was a big conversation. This, of course, in real world terms, pales in comparison to the topic that I just mentioned. But for families across the country, you are now grappling with, a whole new landscape of what it takes to apply to these highly selective institutions. Remember that before COVID, think about just the 8 schools in the Ivy League. We all required standardized testing, and it just wasn't even a question. It was just taken as a given that you had to take the SAT or ACT to apply. Then COVID hits, global pandemic, students can't take the SAT or ACT, and everyone becomes test optional. And then the trickle begins. MIT sort of, is the first dip into the pool, and they reinstate their standardized testing policy. Georgetown, Dartmouth, Yale-ish, not really, test flexible at Yale, and then Brown, and others as well. State institutions, correct me if I'm wrong, Texas requires standardized testing. I think Georgia, Florida state systems require standardized testing. But what you've got right now is this patchwork across the country. It used to be that when someone asked me what the requirements were at our peer institutions, I could just rattle them off, one after the next after the next. Don't ask me what our peer institutions require now. It is just, every institution has some slight variation of either requiring or being flexible or saying they're going to require tests in a year from now or 2 years from now or whatever it is. It is the most confusing landscape in terms of what it takes to even apply that I've ever seen. So this will carry forward as schools continue to analyze the impact of standardized testing and the outcomes that they have on campus. The Supreme Court, let me just tell you This will sound funny, but it is true. It is never a good day when the Supreme Court is considering an admissions case. And that's what we've had to deal with for a number of years. And so, again, putting aside the politics of the Supreme Court decision, we've had iterations of this over the years. There must be lawyers in the room, right? There's some lawyers in the room. Some of you, okay, I won't ask you to identify yourselves, but some of you are lawyers in the room, and you must remember sort of the history of these cases that went through the high court, cases that, starting first with the University of California, but that was back in the late 1960s. More recently, we had cases at the University of Michigan that challenged the use of race in admission. Those were decided in a very split decision, 5-4 decisions. Then we had a case at the University of Texas, a first version of that case and a second version of that case. I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version of these cases, Grutter and Gratz at the University of Michigan, and then Fisher, the Fisher cases at the University of Texas. But every time you knew there was going to be another challenge. And so then came the latest challenge, which was Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill. Given the changes in the composition to the Supreme Court, we anticipated the change that came, which was a little over a year ago, the court ruling that the precedent that had been established that race could be used as, quote, one of many factors in a holistic review of an applicant to a selective institution was no longer the law of the land. The Supreme Court, the opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts, said that you could not use, that the idea that race qua race, that is, race for race's sake, was no longer a reasonable expectation or would no longer be permissible in higher education. We sort of anticipated that ruling was coming. What we didn't anticipate was the impact and the really broad set of outcomes that are actually just now being released. We can talk about this if you have any questions about it. But over the course of about the last 2 to 3 weeks, colleges have been releasing the results of their first class since the Supreme Court decision, and they are all over the map, from dramatic decreases in students of color and historically underrepresented groups to no change whatsoever. And so I think a lot of us now are sort of looking at that broad set of outcomes and saying, how can schools with equal levels of selectivity have such different outcomes? We don't have answers to that yet, but it's a conversation that will continue. I put this up. I put this quote up because it's a segment of the opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts that I think is important, and I put it up here because this tenet, essentially, this idea that race in and of itself should never lead to an outcome, is exactly the way that we have been practicing it in highly selective admissions for years. So I promise you that it was never the case at the Bowdens, at the Princetons, at the Harvards, at the Browns of the world that a candidate's race led to a particular outcome. It may have been part of their story, but it never led to a particular outcome. And I put this particular quote up here because I think it re-emphasizes exactly what we look for, which is that, whether the student connects it to their race or not, a student's experience demonstrating courage or finding inspiration or sharing inspiration or overcoming hardship, regardless of your background, those are the stories that are really compelling to us and that we look for from students from all backgrounds and all races. And so I think it's important to say that, those moments of leadership, those moments of commitment, all of those things that your children may demonstrate in the application process, regardless of who else they may be by background, remain important to us and really do guide the discussion that we have in our admissions committees. Totally different topic, but who would have thought that we would be up here in this room talking about the Dartmouth men's basketball team unionizing? But here we are. This was not a headline that I would have expected 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a year ago, but these are the times that we are living in. And so there is this sort of zeitgeist of student unionization. Why does that matter to any of you? Well, it matters to some of you because when you take college tours, the tour guides, may be in a union. What they say may be something that was negotiated as part of their union contract. That's where we are right now. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing or a good thing. It is just that is the new reality that we're living in right now, and it's something that we all have to deal with. Now, I mentioned holistic admission. So now we're transitioning into what the actual admission process looks like. So I gave you the macro. So those were sort of the major, world events and national events and local events that really helped shape this year. But now let's talk about what holistic admissions is and what it is not. And so part of the reason why I put that Chief Justice Roberts quote up there, and let's go back to that for just a moment. The reason I put this up is that I want you to have this in the back of your mind, not as it relates to the Supreme Court case, but as it relates to the whole person review that we conduct, the fact that we look at everything and that there are no formulas. And so I think this is really an important thing for you to think about. Holistic admissions review. So what is it? Well, it's the process that we use at nearly every highly selective institution. So all of those schools that we mentioned and any school that is in that general neighborhood will more or less practice a version of holistic admission. It's probably easier to start by saying what it is not rather than what it is. People ask me, truly, they ask me all the time, like, so Dean Powell, and they'll pull me aside and they'll say, Dean Powell, I know you said there was no minimum SAT score I need, but just between us, what's the minimum SAT score I need? And I go, no, really, I wasn't lying to everyone else in the room, and now I'm going to give you the secret. There is no minimum SAT score. It is hard to get in. The scores tend to be on the pretty high side, but there's no minimum. There are no cutoffs. There are no quotas. There is no minimum number of students we can admit from Petty in a particular year. It's another common question, by the way. Parent pulls me aside, Dean Powell, we know you only admitted 3 students from Petty this year, so who will the 3 students be this year? I'm like, well, I don't know. We have to have 3 applicants first. I don't know. If 10 students apply, we may admit all 10. If 15 students apply, we may admit 1. I don't know. It just depends. It depends on the year, depends on who those applicants are, and it depends on the stories they tell. But I can assure you, and my hand up, giving you this oath, there are no quotas, there are no cutoffs, there are no minimums. It really is a whole person review. And I think that's what makes this process so confounding for all of you. Because sometimes you just want an answer. You want to know, is this good enough? Is this high enough? Are these the right courses? Are these the right extracurricular activities? And it's probably really frustrating to hear someone like me say, well, it depends. Because we put the whole piece together. We look at all of those pieces in the context in which a student was educated and raised. And so you're going to hear probably more and more than ever going forward something like this. We're looking for excellence in context. So I'm sorry if it becomes overused. I take credit for actually introducing that into the college admissions lexicon, but we really are looking for excellence in context. And so what we expect from a student from Petty is very different from what we expect from a student who goes to, say, Trenton Central, because they're 2 sets of opportunities, and we're never going to compare those 2 students and say who did more of what, and we're automatically going to admit that student. No, the answer is maybe we take them both, but the question that we ask is what did they do with the resources that were available to them, and did they make the most of those opportunities? That's the question we ask. So it's really important to remember again that as much as it is easy to obsess over SAT scores, ACT scores, GPAs, how many advanced AP, whatever courses a student takes, we don't count. We really don't. It's not like we have a grid and we say, if you have, on the y-axis is your SAT score, on the x-axis is your GPA, and if you're above this point, then you're in, and if you're not, then you're waitlisted, and if you're below, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen that way. It is literally opening one file at a time, reviewing one case at a time, and making an informed decision as part of an admissions committee. People often, it's funny, people at Brown, like my colleagues who don't work in admission, when I talk about, how this process works, they say, how do you do it? You had, last year we had, now 2 years ago, we had 51,000 applicants. I say, how did you do it? They say, and they go, what's the secret? And I'll never forget, I think it was actually Katie Ledecky, the great Olympic swimmer. She was asked what the secret to her success was. And I don't know if you saw this or you heard this, but she said, the secret is there is no secret. The secret is it's just a lot of hard work. What you don't see is the practice. What you don't see is the time in the pool, the hours and hours and hours and hours spent. You see a glimpse, you see a snapshot for minutes, but it's hours of time that we spend. And so that is it. The secret is there is no secret. We really do open and read every single application, many of them twice, 3, 4 times. So how do we do it? We work longer days, but it's something that we love to do. Let's talk a little bit about this, because I think these are a variety of things that may come into play at a variety of institutions. I'm not saying, by the way, I am speaking for the world of selective admissions, because some schools, look at these as institutional priorities they consider, and some highly selective schools don't. So what does that mean? Academic excellence I put on top, because academic excellence is really where we start with every consideration, with every review of an applicant. Is the student able not just to do the work, but are they able to excel? Are they intellectually curious? Are they going to take advantage of the curricula that our schools offer? Geographic diversity. That doesn't mean we just admit the one student who applies from North Dakota. It means that we really want a broadly representative student body, and that we're not just taking students from one part of the country or world. Socioeconomic diversity, and I would say also a contribution to socioeconomic mobility, is really increasingly important to us. I don't know if you saw this headline, but I was just with a whole group of deans from all of the schools and then some that we've been talking about. And I was with my good friend and colleague, the Dean of Admissions at Princeton. Princeton's incoming class, I don't know if you saw this, this is something that I began working on when I started at Princeton in 2008. The president at the time, Shirley Tillman, said, we really want greater socioeconomic diversity. Well, they took it and ran with it. This year's entering class at Princeton, 71.5% receive financial aid, need-based financial aid. That's just like hard to even fathom. Not that long ago, it was like 50. So providing opportunities for students who have not had opportunities is important to a lot of these institutions. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it is. And by the way, I should say, racial and ethnic diversity, because some of you, I think, might logically say, but Dean Powell, you just said the Supreme Court said that was not permissible. Well, the use of race qua race is not permissible, but institutions still value racial diversity. The question is how you go about achieving it. But having diversity defined in all of its ways still does remain an important goal for many colleges and universities. I want to touch on a couple more at the end here. Arts and athletics, we are in this spectacular space where you may have children who perform. That kind of artistic talent is still very important to us, as is athletic talent. And then, of course, legacy. This is a controversial topic. I put it in here not to shy away from it, but to say there's a range of ways that schools consider or don't consider this. One of my other dear friends and colleagues with whom I just spent the last 2 days in Boston, Cambridge to be specific, is the Dean of Admissions at MIT. Any MIT alums here, by the way? Just out of curiosity? No, okay. So MIT does not consider legacy at all. Doesn't matter to them whatsoever. Other institutions still value it a great deal. So the point of this is to simply say, you can't take for granted that the institutional priorities at one school will be the same institutional priorities at another school. And so when people see the outcomes that exist, that occur when students apply to college, I hear this all the time. It's a total crapshoot. Trust me, it is not a crapshoot. The outcomes may be perplexing, but I assure you that they are all very deliberately made. But the reasons why a student gets into one school and not another school have to do with, in many cases, the institutional priorities you see behind me. And if a school has a particular need in one of those areas and another school does not, that student, who is equally academically excellent at those two institutions, may have two completely different outcomes. Look at these beautiful cellos over here. this is also a true story. Our orchestra director at Brown a couple of years ago, I shouldn't have pointed to the cellos. I do have cello stories, but I'll tell you a story about harps. I don't see any harps on the stage here, but this is a true story that happened at Brown. We had gone through the entire admission process up to the point of the wait list. So we had gone through early decision, we had gone through regular decision. We were at the point where we needed to start making wait list decisions, and the orchestra director contacted me and he said, "Logan, I realized I forgot to tell you, we are graduating our only harpist. And I forgot to tell you earlier in the process, we need a harpist. Do you happen to have any highly rated harpists on the wait list?" And I said, let me look. We have 2. And they were excellent candidates, and it was also just a lucky year to be a harpist. Like, what can you do? That happens, but you can't predict it and you can't control it. And that's why these outcomes exist that are sometimes inexplicable, that you will not see, but that have very, very real sort of rationales on our side. This is actually, by the way, I feel like I'm saying true story a lot because you may doubt me, but this process, this diagram that I have displayed here behind me, we actually created for our admission staff before we started the application review process. So you're looking at the actual diagram of our admission process at Brown University. This is what we hand out. This is what we share with our admission staff before we start reading. So I'm really giving you the inside look at what the process looks like. Now, again, the details will vary because we're looking at one individual applicant at a time, but this is what it looks like. So for those who say, what does the process look like? This is it. This is literally what the process looks like. I'm not going to walk through each one of these different stages of the process. And if you have questions, by the way, please feel free to lock them away. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. What's important to point out here is that there are many layers of review, rounds of review, and input from outside experts. We very often have faculty members who will read applications from students who are, math prodigies. We have applications that are read by our Italian department and our French department. Classics. We have a wonderful classics professor who reads about 100 applications a year from prospective classics majors. So we have faculty input. Very often we have letters of recommendation from people, far and wide who know the students well and sometimes not so well. We take all of that information, a human-centered process, thinking about the human being behind the application, read by human beings in our office, full-time professional admission staff, and the goal, as always, is to admit, recruit, and enroll the best class ever. And so I say every year to the Brown students who enter, congratulations, you're the best class ever. This is what our class looks like. This is the class of 2028 at Brown, who we just celebrated at Convocation just about a week ago, actually. I provide this detail because I really wanted you to see what, kind of a typical, and Brown is a special place. I love Brown, and I am not trying to suggest that this is in any way generic. Brown is a unique and wonderful place, and I love it as an institution. I have been humbled every day that I've gone to work. The numbers, though, are maybe not unusual in the world of highly selective admission. Whether it's the total volume, 49,000, or whether it's the admit rate, 5%, or whether it is the yield, that is the share of students who accept our offer of admission. So this is final now. I say anticipated because there's always the census that goes on. There's some students who show up and then they disappear, or students who don't show up. It's a very small number, by the way, but it's always anticipated until we do the final head count. But this is kind of what a typical year in the last, call it 5 years looks like for a highly selective, Ivy Plus institution. So when you're thinking about what the chances are, what does the funnel look like? We're kind of in the middle in terms of application volume. So if you think about the range of highly selective Ivy Plus institutions, Columbia, I think most recently probably had the largest, don't hold me to this is just sort of off the top. Columbia had something like 60,000 applicants, and I think a 4% or 3% acceptance rate. Harvard is in that same ballpark. You've got some of the smaller Ivies like Dartmouth and Princeton, equally wonderful places, just very different. They have slightly smaller applicant pools. They're slightly smaller institutions. Their admit rates are typically 5, 6, 7% or so. But we're talking about a sliver of the world of higher education. The vast majority of colleges in the country admit the majority of their applicants. So what you're looking at here is very much the lunatic fringe of admissions. Please, if you take nothing away from anything else that I say, please remember that this is not the norm in the world of college admissions. This is the sliver of the sliver of the sliver. And I acknowledge that, and my colleagues at the Ivy Plus school should acknowledge that the vast majority of schools in this country admit the majority of their applicants. And so it's important to remember that. It's also important to remember that, the goal shouldn't be to get into the most selective school in the world. The goal should be find the school that is right for your child. I mentioned geographic diversity a little while ago. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's just simply to say that New Jersey is important to us. And on our list of top states, I know not all of you are from New Jersey, but I wanted to give you a sense of where our students come from. By the way, it's important for me to point out that the scales here on the x-axis are not the same. So we do not have as many students from Canada as we do from New York, if you just wanted to pick two of the bars. It's important to point that out, so please note that the x-axes are different on that scale. Intended concentrations, again, I think this is important to point out because I sort of laugh a little bit occasionally when I see this. This is, by the way, I would say not unusual for any of the more liberal arts-oriented Ivy Plus institutions. This would look a little bit different at MIT, obviously, but for most of the Ivies, you'd see a set of concentrations that by the way, we call majors concentrations. The distribution, the ranking would look pretty similar with maybe just a few changes. The thing that I laugh about is that when I started at Brown 8 years ago, now 9 years ago, going into my 9th year, we used to recruit computer scientists. We used to literally have on-campus recruitment programs for computer science. About 5 years ago, the chair of the computer science came to me, met in my office, and figuratively speaking said, "No mas, no mas." We are good on computer science. Computer science is now the single largest department at Brown, and probably at most of our Ivy Plus peer schools. So huge growth in popularity in computer science, obviously, a lot of it fueled by the interest in AI, but economics, biology, engineering still wildly popular as well. And so let me pause with that because I have talked for long enough now, and I want to leave plenty of time for dialogue and Q&A. And are you coming back down for are you moderating this part of it? So I hope you have all of your questions in your mind, and you're coming back up to moderate the Q&A? Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Logan, thank you so much. So we have a couple microphones, but I'm gonna repeat the questions as we work the room, and but I'm gonna ask the first question, if that's okay, as we get ready. So. A lot of detail in the information you shared, particularly from the college perspective, institutional priorities. As you think about different grades from 9th through 12th grade, can you share a little bit about what are the controllables on the family side as they consider different types of institutions, liberal arts colleges, research universities, larger state universities? What are the things that they can focus that feel like they have some control over as they navigate the early part of a college search all the way up to the application process?
Right. Yeah, great question. I think I can take this off, right? Can I take this off? I don't want to break it. Okay, there we go. All right, terrific. This will give me a chance to get closer to all of you. So this is a great question to start. Can you still see me okay? This is all good? Yeah, okay, all right, wonderful. Really, you can control a few things. You can control when you start thinking about this process. You can control a little bit about when you begin stressing out about this process. And I suppose to some degree you can control how much you stress about this process. Take it from me, you know where I have worked, you know the level of selectivity. I guarantee you that your level of stress has never made an impact on the decisions that we've made. So I hope that, and I would say this to students, that I hope that they think about it as an opportunity to learn about themselves as they learn about the institutions, because it can be a really stressful process. I cannot stand here and be disingenuous and say, don't worry. It is a stressful process. I completely understand that. But you can control when you begin to think about this. And so I think, certainly Joe and his colleagues are the best in the business at constructing a schedule for when to begin thinking about course selection, how to think about the impact of extracurricular activities, when to begin thinking about going to that first college fair, which you just hosted apparently quite recently. When do you go to that college fair? When do you begin touring colleges and universities? So their input into this process, I think for all of you, is really invaluable because they know how this goes. They have my cell phone number. Like we are close. I mean, they know how this process works, and so I would say trust them and trust their advice. I don't have kids, but I would say, seeing the many thousands who have come through as applicants, I would say I remember one student who I think of quite frequently, and she's actually a student who went to Princeton, so this is a Princeton story. But this was a student who decided that she just really wanted to unplug from all of the external stresses, and she made the decision to stop using social media. She felt like the social media pressures were actually more acute than any other pressure she was feeling. And so she just went cold turkey and just stopped using social media. And she said it was transformative for her. She said it just gave her a new outlook on life. And I said, well, aren't you missing out on, Taylor Swift wasn't really a huge thing then, but I said, aren't you missing out on all the pop culture stuff? And she's like, no, I get that from my friends. But what I don't get is all the external stress. I really get to just sort of guide this process by myself. And I thought that's really incredibly refreshing, really hard to do. Joe and I were talking before this, and I said, in many ways, I was very fortunate. Many of us, probably all of us were very fortunate to have gone to high school and college pre-social media. It's a different world now. It is a really different world. And so, the other thing I would say that is maybe controllable is also just think about those external pressures and try. I know it can feel like you're really fighting an uphill battle, but I would say to the degree you can, try to give some reassurances when those external pressures begin to hit. Other questions? So please ask away.
Hi. I'm just wondering, your child has their eye on a school, right? Or a couple of schools. What would be a good number of schools to apply to where you're not going crazy, but you also have, enough if they don't get into that number one school?
Right.
Where you don't go overboard, you're not stressing, you're not...
That's a great question. Maybe we can team up on this. Maybe you can talk about what the appropriate number of schools to apply to is, and then because my smart aleck answer was maybe it's only one if your student applies early decision or restrictive early action. So I'll pause. Maybe you can start and talk about what a longer list would look like, and then I can talk about early decision, early action.
Yeah, absolutely, Logan. I'll share a quick story. I was traveling earlier this week to visit a college. I will not name the college. I had a lovely tour guide from New Jersey, and at a college considerable ways from New Jersey, a flight away from New Jersey. And she shared with our tour group that she applied to 48 schools. And I was the only college counselor in the tour group with all students and their parents. And that's a number I've never heard of, actually. But
that's too many.
I grabbed her afterwards and asked her about her process, and it was actually pretty thoughtful. had a lot to do with COVID and where she was able to visit. But it's a really good question because we talk about it every year, and the pressures and the stressors that Logan talked about are real, and the number of schools to which students apply adds to that. I think I'll answer the number this way. The unpredictability of college admissions the last couple of years, particularly in regular, has really pressured that number up. So for a number of years, we really talked about 8, 10, 12. That was kind of our mantra, 8, 10, 12, as a list in the beginning, knowing that some students may apply to 1 or 2 early and be done, and others may apply to more in regular. But financial aid circumstances, the unpredictability that I mentioned, tends to push that number up a little bit. So it might not be completely unreasonable to have some students that apply to as many as 15 to 20 schools this year, but that also may include 4 or 5 schools in the University of California system, which is one application. So it's very student specific. It's really part of the conversation we have, particular to a family and a student's circumstances. And the only other thing I'll mention, it's really challenging to apply to that many schools and do it well because of the writing, the fit that goes into supplemental writings. So it's a really big part of our conversations while also recognizing the realities of the unpredictability piece.
Yeah. The financial aid piece is really important to mention. It reminds me. I was thinking about applying early decision to a school when I was a high school senior, and my college counselor said, "I will not allow you to apply early decision." He said, "Your mother is a secretary who lives on government assistance. You need to see the full landscape of financial aid offers." And he wouldn't let me apply early decision. I ended up going to the school that I wanted to apply early decision to that he didn't let me. It turned out they gave me the best financial aid offer, and it was the right place for me. But I think I applied to 12 or 13 schools because I needed financial aid, and I didn't know who was going to give me the financial aid I needed. So that's very real. What many of us, the schools that have the resources, what we have done is to really try to drive home the message that your financial aid in early decision is the same financial aid you'd receive in regular decision and will release you from the commitment if it just doesn't work out. And we do that every year. We release a small handful of students, 3 a year, who have, family expenses that we can't control for and that we can't help fund, and we just say we completely understand. This is what life looks like, and we're not going to make you come if you really feel like you can't do it. So let's talk about early decision really quickly. Early decision and early action, because truly, my first thought was, the right number may be 1, and so for some of your children, they may apply early decision or restrictive early action or early action, get into their top choice school, and be done. And so there's a range across the small liberal arts colleges, universities, Ivy Plus schools of early plans. Some of them are binding, some of them are non-binding. There's early decision 1, there's early decision 2. There's also rolling admission. We don't have time to talk about all the different plans. There's a plan out there for just about everything. But we'll boil it down to a couple sort of big distinctions. Early decision, typically application deadline November 1-ish. Again, this is all ballpark. Don't write this down and say the dean of admission told me it was November 1 and the school says, well, it was October 31st. I'm just generalizing here. Early decision and early action applications are typically due the beginning of November. Those decisions come out typically mid-December. And there are one of 3 outcomes. You can be admitted, you can be deferred, you can be denied. Students who are denied, it's the end of their process, their application is over for the year. Students who are deferred are automatically rolled into the regular decision round, and schools will do that at different levels. There are some schools that defer very, very few students. You're more or less admitted or denied. And then you've got schools who more or less only admit and defer. So you really need to do your research on, sort of what that distribution looks like. If you're admitted, joy to the world, happy holidays, your process may be done. And if you applied to an early decision school, it probably really will be done because you've signed an agreement. And typically that requires your signature and a counselor's signature saying that if you're admitted, if your child is admitted, that you will attend that institution. So that may be it. Those are binding programs. And we then say Brown has early decision, Dartmouth has early decision, Penn, Columbia have early decision. We say if you're admitted, you should then withdraw any other applications you have outstanding because you've said this is your top choice school, the place you want to go over all others, and congratulations. You know, we're happy to welcome you. Early action schools, places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, all have early action, most of them restrictive early action. What they say is you can apply on the same timetable, but you can only apply to that one school. That's typically the rule. You can only apply to that one school early. But if you're admitted, you still have until May 1st to decide if you'd like to attend, and you can apply to other schools in regular decision. Now, if you get into Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT, or Stanford early action, please don't apply. You're good. You won. You won, you got in. Probably you can just call it a day, call it a year, and wear the sweatshirt and be really happy and continue to do your homework, I tell students. But that's probably going to be the end of the process for most students because, you know, that's what they want. That was their dream. But technically, they could still apply to other institutions, regular decision if they wanted to. So I hope that helps answer your question. It's a great question. Great. Yeah. Great question. So the distribution for us for admit, defer, and deny, we admit, so this is, I'm going to just again sort of like big numbers here, and the numbers vary a little bit from year to year. About 15% admitted, about 15% deferred, and the rest are denied. So about 70% denied. Again, a little fluctuation, 13%, 14%, 12%, but in that ballpark. I'm just using kind of a big sort of rough, what looks like a, sort of standard distribution, normal distribution. So the deferred, so the follow-up question, so the first question, I think I repeated it, was what does that look like what does the admit, defer, and deny look like for Brown specifically? And then do we admit students who were deferred? Absolutely. We for the past, 8 years, the admit rate for the deferred students looks very much like the admit rate for students who apply a regular decision. So it's a low percentage, but it is very much in line with the admit rate in regular decision. That ends up being, in any given year ballpark, about 100 students who we admit who had applied early decision, who were deferred, who we admit then in the regular decision round. Yeah, great question. Yes?
Standardized testing, how is used from the college admission as an initial filtering to sort the students, or is it part of the whole application packet?
So if I understood the question, is there a
standardized
filtering?
Testing?
Oh, standardized testing.
Yes.
Is there filtering that goes on to sort of lead to like the next round of review?
Yes.
Right?
Is that how it's used or not?
That is not how it's used. It's not how we use it, no. So the question, just to reiterate, and I want to make sure I get this question right, do we use standardized testing as a filter to begin the application process? Harken back to the story I told about test optional that was forced upon us by COVID. Over the last, and this was pretty common for most highly selective institutions. About 2/3, so from 2021 when the policy went into effect that we were test optional until this year where we are now going back to requiring standardized testing, for most of the peer group, and again, please don't quote me on this, don't run to Harvard or Yale or Princeton and say Dean Powell said, but more or less about 2/3 of the applicant pool, I probably should just speak for Brown, about 2/3 of the applicant pool during the test optional years did submit standardized testing. So because of that, about 1/3 did not submit standardized testing, and therefore you couldn't use standardized testing as the initial filter because about 1/3 of students didn't even submit it. And we were not going to hold that against them. We then, of course, put more emphasis on the courses they took, the rigor of those courses, how well they did in those courses. Standardized testing, as we have found out, and as MIT has indicated, as Dartmouth has indicated, it's helpful as one of the many factors we look at. It's not determinative. And so let me extrapolate from your question and say, when we go back to requiring standardized testing this year, will we use it as a filter? The answer is still no. We literally just open an application. We have a sense of what the academic standards will be, but it's never a filter by SAT score. Sure. Let's see. Right. How about right here in the middle? Yes, with the guest shirt on. There's a microphone right coming your way.
I just want to ask, is GPA a filter to GPA? Because many highly selected universities claim that they have top 10% of the graduating class because schools are different. Especially some school has very, the grading inflation. So how you filter the GPA?
Right. No grade inflation here.
Logan, can I qualify that question before you answer?
Please.
It? So to make it specific to Petty, so on our official transcript, we do not include a numeric GPA. We have an internal GPA for data and points that our parents see, but we don't include one on the official transcript. Can you share a little bit how you read and evaluate a transcript that does not include a GPA?
Absolutely. This is now. So Joe, you've opened the door to a deep dive, and I'll try to keep this brief. Your question was about whether or not we use GPA, or and I'll expand a little bit and say class rank. Do we use class rank, for example? No. Again, the answer is no. We do not. It's one indicator. It begins to tell us something about where the student is relative to their classmates, but it is never the reason a student is admitted or denied, waitlisted, deferred, et cetera. It's one data point among many. It's an important one. I'll be honest. Testing is really informative. Grades are informative. GPA can be informative, but it's never determinative. So Joe's question was, well, what do we do in these cases where a school doesn't give us a GPA? We actually have to calculate an unweighted GPA. And so why do we have to do that? We're part of an athletic conference called the Ivy League. That's what the Ivy League is. It is an athletic conference. I'm not going to go all the way in depth about how we do this. Just not because I think it's a secret from you, but because it would take a long time to explain sort of how the process works. But the point is, we have a standard in the Ivy League that our student athletes this is the Ivy League standards, that our student athletes are quote unquote representative of the whole. And so we have to come up with some numerical way to represent that and to demonstrate that our student athletes are representative of the whole. We also have to have a common floor so that one Ivy League institution isn't taking a student who is dramatically below, in terms of academic ability, what other schools would be able to take. So there's a common floor below which we cannot go, but in order to figure out what that floor is, you have to calculate a GPA for every student. And so we use a GPA if a student has one. We calculate a GPA if they don't have one, but again, all of that is not, forget all that other stuff. I needed to explain why we had to calculate a GPA, but I don't want you to worry that, there's some massive difference between a 3.8 and a 3.9 and a 3.7 or a 4.0. That is not, we are never, ever, I can't recall a single time in all the years I've done this saying, let's admit the student because they have a 3.9 and deny the student because they have a 3.8. That is not a conversation we have. It's always, how well have they done in their context? Have they taken tough courses? And beyond that, are they a good student? Is this a student that our faculty would want to have in the classroom, even if they got a B? Those are the conversations we have. So thank you for asking that. Over here. Okay, great.
Can you tell us a little bit what you're looking for in the college essay? What makes a successful college essay? You read thousands of them. So
Yeah.
What stands out?
Yeah, the college essay. We were talking about this a little bit actually before the program because one of our, I'll be Brown specific again, we have a supplement, and this was going back to Joe's point. One of the reasons why you probably shouldn't apply to 48 schools is we care what you write in the essays, your children obviously. We care what the students write and how specifically they answer the question. So let me give you a what not to do and then maybe a what to do. These are real world examples from last year. We had a student, dynamite student from I'll just say broadly the New York, New Jersey area, so that we don't, not from Petty, not from Petty. This would never happen with a Petty applicant. The student was fantastic. We all just absolutely loved her as an applicant. And you know, everything about her was terrific. And she wrote one of her supplemental essays about how much she loved the Great Books curriculum. The punchline is Brown does not have a Great Books curriculum. We have the open curriculum. Columbia has the Great Books curriculum. And it was a fantastic essay about the power of the Great Books curriculum, which I think is actually really cool. Columbia is an amazing place. The Great Books curriculum is really interesting. It's just not what we have. And so here was this really like wrenching situation about what do we do with this student who clearly just did not read the prompt and copied and pasted the wrong essay into our essay prompt. Don't be, you know, we don't want students to be in that situation. We want them to answer the question we asked and to answer it with as much specificity as possible. So I'm giving you kind of a what not, you know, what a student should not do is take a generic essay that they think is transferable across all schools and think that we're not going to notice. We notice and we care because the decisions we make, remember that pyramid, that inverted pyramid I showed, we have really tough decisions to make, and a lot of those decisions are at the margins. And a student who can write a really beautifully crafted, compelling essay about the open curriculum is probably going to fare better than a student who writes a beautiful essay about a curriculum that we don't have. Let me give you another example. We have another supplemental essay paraphrasing the prompt, but the prompt is more or less, what brings you joy? We love this question because we want to know what makes students happy, what brings them joy, and it's also really, it's joyful for us to read those essays. And this is a young man who wrote an essay about walking neighborhood dogs. Like his family did not, one of his like immediate family members was terribly allergic to dogs, but he loved dogs. And he wrote his essay about walking neighborhood dogs because it got him out, he got to meet the neighbors, we love dogs, any dog essay is going to be a winner. Inside scoop, it's true, it's just totally true. So it really is, that's the secret. Yes, the secret is that we can conclude the program. The secret is we love dogs. Any dog essay, right to the top of the pile. That is the forget SAT scores, dog essays every time. So that was a wonderful essay. There was another one from a student. I will just say sort of broadly described a student from the West Coast who wrote an essay about taking the bus to school. She went to a magnet school in California, and she wrote about taking a bus to school, but she was part of her school's like rifle drill team. It's a wooden rifle. Like, I don't know if you've seen these. It's like a wooden rifle drill team. So she would get on the bus with her wooden rifle. And of course, you know, people didn't know what the heck was going on. And she wrote about all these fascinating conversations she had with people on the bus on her way to school in the morning. And it was, you know, again, it was just so, like, you would not ever think to write that essay, but it was just really interesting. So the point that I'm trying to make in what do we look for in essays? We look for students who actually answer the question. We look for authenticity. Humility goes a long way. It's probably not a great time to like list sort of like a brag sheet. Humility goes a long way, for sure. And then there's the old, like, if you're not funny, don't submit like your new material as part of your essays. So those are really the big things. Let me just say one more quick word on this. OpenAI, ChatGPT. You've heard of it. Some of you probably use it. I am, again, like one of those people who's beginning to use it a little bit more because I find it fascinating. I think there's probably compulsion on the part of many students to think about using it. This is another one of those, be very careful because different schools will have, different colleges and universities will have different policies about whether or not the applicants are allowed to use AI. You know, any kind of like large language model, you know, generative AI. Be very careful. Not just because, you know, your children may run afoul of some policy that they just didn't, you know, read the fine print and understand, but also because I've seen a lot of AI-generated essays, and they're grammatically correct, but they're not compelling. You know, AI isn't going to write the essay about walking the neighborhood dogs or, you know, who you meet on a bus. It's not. It's going to write a legitimate, finely written essay, but it is not going to move us probably emotionally in any way, the way that an authentic essay would. So I would advise any student applying to college, don't use ChatGPT. Find someone to proofread the essay for grammar and spelling, but don't use AI to write your essay. There was one, I don't know where over here.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and enthusiasm for this process. I just had a quick question about a declared major. You mentioned in the admissions process that sometimes faculty evaluate certain students, and you know, are you at an advantage if you're a classics major versus the economics major, let's say, for example?
Right. Yeah, great question. So, you know, are there advantages to applying with an intended concentration in one area versus another? And you mentioned classics versus computer science. That is a classic example. The answer is, you know, you'll probably laugh. The answer to almost any admissions question is it depends, and that's true. It's not really a joke. The answer is it depends. And so why does it depend? Because going back to this theme of authenticity, you know, we actually do read the application. And so if a student says they're interested in classics or medieval studies, you know, that's really cool. I mean, really, really cool. We have a concentration in Judaic studies. It's a very, very small concentration. And so students who are interested in these smaller concentrations can really stand out in the applicant pool. But say you're applying to Brown and you declare a concentration in Judaic studies and classics. But you spent your first summer interning at JP Morgan, and then you spent your second summer interning at Google, and then you spent your third summer like at a computer science summer camp. We're probably not going to get a lot of flavor of classics or Judaic studies in that application. We're probably going to say, maybe, but when we look for, those students who we're going to admit because we think they're going to go into those less populated concentrations, we really need to see evidence that they're serious about it. And so that can be summer work. It can also be academic coursework. So if you're interested in classics and your high school offers Latin and Greek, we're going to be looking for Latin and Greek classes and success in Latin and Greek classes. If all you take is, sciences and you're allergic to the humanities, it's probably going to be a hard sell, to convince us that you're going to go, somersaulting into one of our humanities departments. So the answer is it depends. It can be helpful. And I'm being completely candid with you here in the sense that, again, computer science, they have all the concentrators they need, and they're saying you can be really selective with computer science. Classics, Judaic studies, medieval studies, Italian studies, German, French, the Romance languages, they would really love to have more concentrators. Across the country, there's been a steep decline in the number of humanities majors and sharp growth in the number of STEM concentrators or majors. And so when we're thinking about admitting students, not to the program, because, and again, this will vary from school to school, but at Brown, like many other places, Harvard, Princeton, and others, you're not being admitted to the major. That means, if you apply and you get in, regardless of what you told us you were going to study, you can study anything you want. You can tell us you wanted to study classics, get to Brown, and never take a single classics course. But because it was one of the reasons we, presumably leaned in the direction of admitting you, there really needs to be some pretty solid evidence that you are committed to it. And so we really ask some probing questions about the level of commitment in those smaller concentrations. Yes.
How helpful are the summer pre-college program in the application? Brown has a very good, very popular summer program. Would that help when the student apply to Brown? Would that give the student some advantage?
Great question. So summer programs, like Brown, thank you for saying that. Brown does have a great summer pre-college program. I don't have anything to do with it, but it's a great pre-college program. The answer is no. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, I worked at Harvard for a number of years. You know, going to Harvard summer school, it's wonderful. I'd say the advantage is to the applicant because they really get to know the school better. You know, if you spend 2, 4, 6 weeks on a college campus at Harvard or Brown or, you know, any place that has a summer program, typically the advantage is that you're taking college level work, you're away from home, it's a great experience. In my admissions experience, it is not, it's not a factor that is heavily considered in whether or not to admit someone. You know, it's nice, by the way, like if a student takes a couple courses and they get A's, it's helpful. But if they're getting A's in our pre-college programs, they're probably getting A's in all their high school courses. And so it's like, it's marginally additive, but it's never going to be the reason that we're going to admit someone.
Can I follow up with that question?
Absolutely.
In terms of, if you take that perspective, thinking about summers, can you share a little bit of insight, maybe an anecdote that you may have about students that you've read and gotten to know and how students have spent their summers after their freshman year, after their sophomore year, maybe examples and maybe words of encouragement for how to spend some of that time?
Yeah, that's a great thought. Thank you for actually prompting me to talk about that, because I realized the examples I gave of this fictional student were completely outlandish. Like none of our applicants are interning in the summer at JP Morgan and Google. So deep exhale. That was completely made up, and it was completely hyperbolic. That was hyperbolic. That was not an example. That was not an actual example. That was purely fictional for the purposes of this fictional character student that I made up. You know, kind of the modal experience for our applicants is like, you know, a summer camp. You know, maybe some summer work, whatever that happens to be. Anything constructive, an internship sometimes, but it can be anything. There's no checklist for things that we look for. It really depends on the family's circumstances. So, you know, if a student had the opportunity to, you know, to travel, look, we'll all be really jealous. You know, it's a great opportunity if a student can travel. If they had an internship somewhere, you know, whether it was research or professional, can be great experience. It can be wonderful. We love, I would say, by the way, put this in the category of unsolicited advice. It's always nice when we see the student has taken these things on through their own motivation, rather than something that appears forced upon them. Not suggesting anyone in this room would do that, but when we see that the student has done something that is really, you know, sort of driven by their own interest and their own motivation, it can go a really long way. But we also recognize the realities of what it means depending on, you know, what that student needs to do. In some cases, we have students who have to work in the summer to help support their families. That's compelling, you know, like if you had to, you know, deliver pizzas or, you know, work part-time somewhere, compelling. You know, if you had to mow lawns for, you know, for a summer, I can relate to that, you know, like all of those experiences can be really compelling. I would just say anything that is productive, that's, you know, somewhat structured. You know, the thing that we don't like to see is like, you know, I sat in the basement and ate Cheetos all summer. You know, like get out, get some vitamin D, you know, talk to people, interact, learn, grow, experience the world. Anything that a student does that is productive and self-motivated will go a long way. Do we have other? Sure.
How important is it to have like contact touches with the admissions office, such as, you know, campus visits, campus rep?
Great question. Oh my gosh. So this is where the world of college admissions, this is where the path really diverges. So what you're talking about, and I'm going to take your question is about how important are those touches with the admissions office. In the admissions world, that's called demonstrated interest. It's a term that you may have heard. If you're really, really deep in the weeds, it's just referred to as DI, but demonstrated interest. So Colleges and universities will use this differently. At the highly selective institutions, we don't use it at all. It's nice, you know, if you go for a tour at Princeton or Harvard, or you do a virtual information session at Yale, wonderful. By the way, I would say the same at, like, you know, the Bowdoins, Williams, Amherst of the world, you know, equally selective but small liberal arts colleges. Typically, demonstrated interest is not a factor. Whether you visited is not going to be a formulaic sort of calculation. There are some small liberal arts colleges where, you know, if they offer an on-campus interview, it's the interview that would make a difference. It would, you know, it may be the, I got to know this student, and I think they would be a compelling addition to the class, but just the, you know, the fact that the student visited or opened an email is probably not going to be the reason they were admitted or denied. Now, that being said, I have a close contact who works at a Big Ten school, a wonderful, wonderful Big Ten school, and they have a whole calculation for demonstrated interest. I mean, it's really detailed, and there is a point system. If you open an email, you get a certain number of points. If you come to an on-campus program, this is true. This is actually the way I've seen it. I have seen the PowerPoint presentation, and everything that you do to touch the admission office leads to a certain number of points that could lead to a particular outcome. So again, this is where, like, you know, it's not one size fits all. And so I would say, you know, when your children are getting emails, I mean, you may laugh at this. Your children get that email from that school, and you think, whatever. That school is tracking whether or not your son or daughter opened the email, clicked through the links in the email, went back to the school's website. They're tracking all of that, and it can lead to literal points in a DI and a demonstrated interest formula that can influence the outcome of the application process. So it's a great question. You know more about this than I do. Is there anything else you'd add on this?
I think the idea of the demonstrated interest piece is interesting because it really reflects this idea of yield on the college's side.
Exactly.
And I think those touch points, opening emails, how long you stay on a page, on a website, is something that is tracked as well. I think I mentioned the unpredictability earlier, and the yield factor, whether that's a highly selective school deferring a certain number of students into the regular pool, trying to predict the likelihood of enrollment down the stretch. The activity on the wait list also plays a role in that in terms of likelihood to yield.
Right.
We often refer to wait lists as early decision 3 on our side because it seems like that's how it works. But
Yeah.
I think that, you know, Logan's mentioned, referenced the word depends quite a bit, which is, you know, on the college admission side, you've probably heard that. That's a joke that it really does, and in the context as well. So I think those are important conversations to have. So
yeah,
we appreciate you sharing that. Can I just add a little bit with regard to interviews, and particularly to Brown?
Mm-hmm.
The use of alumni interviewing has really kind of has also diverged at different schools. You mentioned admissions interviews at smaller liberal arts colleges where they are thumb in the scale in some way in getting those students. Yep. Can you just touch a little bit on alumni interviews in general?
Yeah. Great follow-up question. So we suspended, being Brown specific, we suspended our alumni interviewing program during COVID. I'll say a word or two more about this really quickly. We really just had a scale problem. You know, when you have 51,000 applicants, it's really hard to have meaningful alumni interviews for all of them, and we really wanted to be equitable. We were in a situation, as many schools are, where you can't possibly interview every applicant, and so you have to make this really tough decision about who you interview, and how do you make that decision. Do you try to interview everyone? Well, you try, and for many years, you know, even when I started for the first, 3-4 years I was at Brown, I would stand in front of an audience and say, every student who applies will be offered an interview. Minus the students who live in such remote parts of the world that, like, we can't reach them. Everyone was offered an interview, and that changed really dramatically. The year before COVID, we had 38,000, so the good old days, 38,000 applicants. And we had about 8,000 of them who wanted an interview, requested an interview, and could not be granted an interview. And so it was really important to me. Joe read my intro in the beginning. I really believe that we should be as equitable as we can. It may at times feel unfair, but I feel like an opportunity in the application process that's open to one should be open to all, or open to none. And so we suspended the alumni interviewing program, and in its place, we offered what we call a video introduction. It allows a student to record a video, selfie style, no CGI, no special effects, no soundtrack, just 2 minutes. Everyone who's applying right now knows how to use a cell phone or some kind of video recording device. And we just want 2 minutes in their own words. And so the reason we did that was that it was completely scalable up to however many students applied. And it allowed the student to share in their own voice who they were. And so we have found it to be incredibly, incredibly impactful. So I would say another example of this, you could have asked about, what do you do with optional parts of the application? If it's a highly selective institution, optional does not really mean optional.
Say that again.
It's true. If a school says the video introduction is optional, technically it is. But if you want to get in, submit the video introduction. We're not alone in this. The University of Chicago also offers a video introduction. Brown offers a video introduction. Let's talk about your question was about alumni interviews. If they're optional, should you take advantage of them? Again, I worked at Harvard for a number of years, and we had students then, and the Harvard alumni are phenomenal. They're incredibly dedicated. Same was true at Princeton. Incredibly loyal alumni. I could tell stories about the Princeton alumni. They're phenomenal. They wanted to interview everyone, and they very often would. But a student who declined the optional interview effectively declined their opportunity to be admitted. The signal that was sent to the institution was, I'm not interested in learning more about your institution from this alumnus or alumna. And so if the student said, I decline the optional interview, look, when you've got an admit rate as low as these schools do, you don't help them make that decision. That becomes a very, very easy decision. And so, if there's an optional alumni interview, take them up on the option. They're usually, they should be informative. They're not intended to be Jeopardy style. This is not a consulting interview. It's you don't need to do any kind of homework before it. It should just be a casual conversation. Look, by and large, in every case I've ever seen, the alumni want the interviewee to get in. Like, they are really trying to make the case for the applicant because they take great pride in getting students in because it's so hard. They brag about how many students they get in. And so rest assured, if your children go through an alumni interviewing process, those alumni interviewers are really trying hard to get those kids in. That's their goal.
I think we have time for one more question. Yep.
Thank you for sharing us tonight. We learned a lot. So can you just conclude what kind of student the Brown University truly like?
What kind of student do we really like? I would.
This is a terrific last question.
It is a great last question.
Sum it up for us.
Academic excellence. No, look, we're all looking for good people. We really are. We're looking for good community members. And so, almost regardless, if you're talking about a selective or highly selective institution, we have so many incredibly qualified and academically talented students in the applicant pool. That what we look for beyond that. Let me answer it with this question. My favorite tradition at Brown every year is convocation. You had convocation on Labor Day, I believe, right? And do you do like a procession? Do the students all, okay, so they all process in. Same with Brown, same with other institutions. It was the same at Princeton and Harvard and Bowdoin, and all these great schools have this convocation ceremony. It's my favorite time of the year. It's my favorite event of the year. And it's because the students are walking officially onto the campus to start a new academic year, and it's the very first day that they are literally officially students of that institution. And what I love to see at Convocation is just how incredibly dynamic and diverse and interesting those students are. They wear t-shirts that, you know, give you a sense of like what sport they'll play or instrument they'll play, what volunteer group they'll be a part of. They wear t-shirts that, that indicate that they did one of the pre-orientation like outing club trips. They don't wear t-shirts that have their SAT scores or GPA on them. I couldn't care less. Like, I don't remember a the students I remember who walked by, one was a military veteran who I got to know during the application process, who, when he visited, I just thought his story was incredible. As he walked by, I said, "Hey, Leo," "Hey, Dean Powell." You know, another student who walked by from California who I remembered, "Hey, how are you?" "Hey, good, Dean Powell, oh my gosh." We're really interested in, not in, inflating our numbers. We're not interested in having the lowest acceptance rate or, having the highest SAT average. I am delighted when those students process at Convocation and I see a dynamic new community, a dynamic new generation of Brown students entering the campus for the first time, thinking not at all about what their SAT scores were or what their GPAs were, but knowing that they're smart, they're interesting, they're engaged. Every one of them has to pass what we call the roommate test, the classmate test. If you can't be a good roommate to someone or a good classmate to someone, I don't care how smart you are. You need to be a good community member on top of everything else. And so, bottom line, we're looking for great people. So with that, was that the last question? Because I wanted to thank you for having me again. Thank your staff for having me. Thank you to Petty for having me. It's really been an honor to be back and to spend some time with all of you. I wish you all the very, very best.
Logan, thank you so much. And I think we'll close because I think that was an excellent last question and a fantastic answer, because one of the things we talk about a lot as a team in our office with our students is that when we talk about highly selective admissions and we look at numbers and we think about all the different variables that go into it, our students and parents often think, what are schools looking for? And we try to flip that and say, it's actually what you're looking for as a student and an applicant, and then make that match. And I think so much of what you shared tonight, Logan, really addressed that. There's so many things outside of our control, going back to that first question, but how do we center the student to find that fit, and really identify what's most important when they reflect early and then they look for those right choices. So thanks for really contextualizing that. And if we remember one thing, it's dog walking tonight. So I have 2 dogs that I will adopt out to any of your students. Yeah. Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for everyone that joined us from afar. Have a great weekend.